Listeners, this is Mr. Bennett. Welcome back to class, guys, albeit in a slightly different format. So for my 8th grade students, this is going to be the first in a series of lectures and slideshows on the Civil War. And today we're going to be looking at the very beginning of the Civil War. If you go access these slides through Canvas or Google Drive, you can also click that link there at the bottom to see a Quizlet of terms and people that could help you with your definitions. So let's open up by talking about a little bit of these pictures showing the absolute abject devastation left by the Civil War, right? The bloodiest war in American history, because it was what? Yeah, that's right. Americans fighting and killing other Americans. So let's jump on in to lesson 1, the beginning of the Civil War, right? All that sectional tension that we talked about of the 1840s and 1850s has finally come to a head with the election of Abraham Lincoln. And we're going to talk about how that leads to the deadliest events in American history. So the election of 1860, right? Our boy there on the top right-hand corner, Abraham Lincoln himself, is nominated by the Republican Party, this new upstart, brand spanking new political party founded in the North Midwest region, literally in like a little teeny tiny house. They nominate Abraham Lincoln. And so this party, again, they do not, quote, do not want to end slavery entirely. They just want to stop the spread of slavery, right? That westward expansion that we talked about in all of those previous lessons and chapters. They want to stop slavery from expanding into the gray areas on that map, into the territories, right? And causing more problems like we've seen in where? Kansas and Nebraska, right, with the Bleeding Kansas events. They are not, I repeat, they are not against slavery in the South to start with, right? Eventually they kind of end up leaning in that direction, but they don't want to mess with slavery. They don't want to abolish slavery. They might hold personal convictions that are abolitionist beliefs. They may hate slavery, but as a party, right, their platform is not about ending slavery, just stopping it from going west. Now, on the flip side, the Democrats can't agree on anybody, and they make a horrible political mistake, and they nominate 3 guys. They nominate Stephen Douglas, Breckinridge, and Bell. These 3 guys pictured on, or their names are on the bottom right hand of that map there. So 3 different candidates. Stephen Douglas and the current vice president at that time, the vice president under President Buchanan, John Breckinridge. So Lincoln, when all is said and done and the election's over, he only wins 39% of the popular vote. So most people in America actually voted for the Democrats, actually voted to maintain things as they were, right, and leave slavery alone. However, but because of that majority being split between 3 candidates, they didn't get enough electoral power to win, and so it does go to Lincoln. However, Lincoln doesn't win. If you look at that map, he's the pinkish red color. He doesn't win any southern states. And that is horrifying to Southerners, because now this shows that the North, along with the West, if you include the Oregon state and California, they have enough electoral power to elect a president and to pass laws in Congress without any Southern support, which theoretically means that they could act as a unit, act as a dictatorship, and absolutely crush the South, and theoretically even end slavery. And so that's really going to be the driving force behind what causes these next things to happen. So the Southerners, because they are scared of losing slavery and power, political power within the houses of Congress, they have to take drastic action. And the first state to be like, we're out, we're bouncing, is South Carolina, right? Upstart South Carolina, going all the way back to the nullification crisis, going all the way back to John Cena Calhoun having beef with Andrew Jackson, and somebody gets threatened to have their head cut off. That South Carolina. They quit before Lincoln even takes office. They secede, right? They officially remove themselves from the United States, and 6 other states follow suit, and those states are Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and of course, us here in Texas, even though our governor, Sam Houston, was like, hey, I don't think we should do this. Sam Houston's a pretty chill guy, did own slaves though, so that's a little bit of a con against him. But Sam Houston urged Texas to stay out of it, to not secede. and eventually he was forced to step down as governor. Lincoln even sent him a telegraph, I believe, at one point and was like, hey, man, do you want me to send troops down there to kind of help you out? And Houston was like, no, if the people of Texas want to do this, he's like, I do have to listen to the people. And so he does step down. And eventually Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina all secede as well after the first major battle, here being Fort Sumter. So one of the things that kind of exacerbates the problem is that the president at the time, James Buchanan, did nothing. He was like a lame duck president. So he was on his way out, right? And in the couple of months between him leaving office and Lincoln taking office, right, Buchanan does nothing. He lets them secede. He doesn't fight any battles. He's like, I wash my hands of it. I'm going to let Lincoln deal with it. So Buchanan had the power to do something, and he chose not to use that power. Huge mistake. So the states that have all quit, that have seceded, they form what is known as the Confederate States of America, headed up by that guy in the top right-hand corner, Confederate President Jefferson Davis. So their entire argument is that the U.S. government no longer has their consent, right? This idea going back all the way to the Declaration of Independence, going back into our Constitution. Southerners believe that since you have a president and essentially a House and a Senate that can do whatever they want without any Southern support, right? There's enough electoral power in the North to do whatever they want that they no longer need the South's consent to pass laws. And so the South is trying to preempt this by saying, hey, we're going to get out, we're going to go, we're going to start our own thing, we're going to take care of our own business. We are no longer being governed with our consent. We no longer have a voice or a say in this country, and so we're going to dip. That's not to say, right, let's not forget, they quit because of slavery, right? That's the heart of the issue. No ifs, ands, buts. It's not about states' rights. If anybody tells you it's states' rights to, right? Ask them that question. States' rights to what? What rights? And they're like, property. What property? The kind of property that's people. Oh, you mean slaves? It's slaves, right? They're fighting for slaves. They quit for slavery. So Davis doesn't want to fight, but he's not afraid of fighting. And that's something that both Jefferson Davis and Abraham Lincoln make very clear in their inaugural addresses. They're like, look, we don't want to start a fight, but gosh golly, we'll end one. So here's a map of the United States during this conflict, during the Civil War. The blue and light blue, that is going to be the United States of America as the South recognizes it, right? The Union. And the gray, with the exception of Missouri, is going to be the Confederacy. You see some gray states above that pink line. Those gray states are slave states that remained in the Union. Those are border states. Those are going to be very, very contentious states, very important states that both sides want to hold. But they do remain in the Union. They do not secede, but they do have slaves. And we'll talk a little bit more about the significance of that as we get deeper into this chapter. All right, so let's talk about Lincoln taking office. So Lincoln has to address the issue of secession in his first speech to the country, in his first inaugural address, right? These people have quit since he's been elected, and so he's got to make some kind of comment about it. And so he promises to not interfere with slavery in the South. He says he wants to stop it expanding west. That's the official Republican Party platform. But he says, look, I'm not going to take slaves away. He's like, I promise. He's like, that's not my goal. And then he emphasizes that what they're doing, right, that seceding, that quitting the United States is unconstitutional. There's no background for it. There's no legal precedent for it. He's not even sure they're allowed to do it. And he makes it very clear that he does not recognize these seceding states as a different country. They're just states in rebellion, because if he recognizes them as a different country, they've won, right? If a place declares independence and you go, hey, you're independent, then they win. So he can't recognize them as independent. He constantly refers to them as the rebelling states. And he promises that he will preserve the Union. For the first half of this war, that's Lincoln's goal, is to preserve the Union by force if necessary. He says, I'm going to bring these states back in. We're going to get them to follow the laws as they are. Now, he argues, right, because Lincoln's a lawyer, that the Constitution is a contract, and a contract cannot be canceled without an agreement between all parties, the North and the South in this case. He says, look, the South can't quit unless the North allows them to quit. However, the South would counteract that and say that the contract was null and void and all this stuff. But he's approaching it as a lawyer, right? Lincoln's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. And then it all comes to a head at Fort Sumter. So there's this Union fort, right? A United States Army station or Navy station, I don't remember, in South Carolina, right? It's on an island. And so it's owned and operated by the United States military, but it's technically in what is now the Confederacy. But they are loyal to the Constitution. They're loyal to the President, Lincoln, and that's their job. And so Lincoln, when he's asked to surrender the fort to the Confederacy, says, no, I'm not going to do that. That's my property. And so he sends them an emergency resupply. He sends ships with supplies on them. Supposedly no guns or ammunition, just like food, the things they need. And the Confederacy is like, hey, you can't do that, right? That's an act of war. And he says, no, it's not. And so they start shooting, right? They walk in and they start blasting, blah, blah, blah. And so on April 12th, 1861, Confederate forces fire on Fort Sumter, saying that this has been an act of war, right? Lincoln's continued support of you is an act of war. And so that is the official beginning of the American Civil War. The first major battle being Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter, first battle of the American Civil War. After this, a huge chunk of what was then Virginia breaks off, and it's the western half of Virginia, west of the Appalachian Mountains, and including some of the mountains themselves. And they become their own state because they don't care, right? These are mountain people. They don't have slaves. These are poor whites who don't own slaves, who don't feel like they have a horse in this race, and so they quit. And so now that even deepens the gap, right? Furthers this divide between North and South, because now there's a new northern state, and that means that now there's more northern electoral power, and that if this war ends, the South's definitely not going to have a say in things going forward. So let's jump into our quiz. We've just got a couple of quick questions to kind of do some star review. So question 1, which constitutional issue was President Lincoln addressing in this excerpt? So we've got an excerpt, President Lincoln, and a message to Congress, July 4th, 1861. So he says, the states have their status in the Union, and they have no other legal status. The Union, and not themselves separately, procured their independence and their liberty. So what issue is he talking about? Is it F, the right of citizens to choose their representatives? G, the power of states to organize militias? H, the unalienable rights of citizens? Or J, the legal ability of states to secede? Go ahead and take your time. If you want to pause this video and look at this question for a little bit, kind of think things through, that's fine. But we are going to continue. Hopefully you all picked J. He's saying that they don't have the right to secede, that this entire thing is completely, it's shenaniganerous, right? It is illegitimate. He says that there's no legal basis for what they're doing. He is a lawyer. Question 2. In the excerpt above, what does, quote, this interest refer to? So this is from Lincoln's second inaugural address in 1865. We haven't even gotten there yet, but hopefully from the context clues and what you know about U.S. history, and if you've been doing your online packets or readings, you should be at this point already. Lincoln says, all knew that this interest was somehow the cause of the war. To strengthen, perpetuate, and extend this interest was the object for which the insurgents would rend the Union even by war, while the government claimed no right to do more than to restrict the territorial enlargement of it. So what is Lincoln referring to when he says this interest? Is it F, the Confederate States of America? G, protective tariffs? H, slavery? Or J, the U.S. Constitution? Take a minute. Hopefully you all were paying attention and have a general understanding that this interest is slavery, right? They're talking about slavery, H being the answer, right? Slavery is what the South was trying to perpetuate and strengthen and why they were fighting. All right, moving on now to question 3. So here we have an image, the bombardment of Fort Sumter. So how is the event depicted in this image significant to the Civil War? So really, what was the significance of Fort Sumter? Was it A, the Confederate defense of the besieged fort lengthened the war? B, the Union victory divided the Confederacy along the Mississippi River? C, the invasion of the Confederate capital resulted in the surrender of the Confederacy? Or D, the Confederate attack upon the Union fort initiated the war? Take a moment, ask yourself, why is Fort Sumter important? Why did we talk about it? And hopefully you come to the right conclusion, which is D. The Confederate attack upon the Union fort initiated the war. Question 4. Which idea does President Lincoln express in this excerpt? So this is again from his first inaugural address in 1861. He says, we must not be enemies, Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. Which idea does President Lincoln express in this excerpt? Is it F, that the Union exists only through the consent of sovereign states? G, the Union requires a nationwide decision on slavery? H, the Union matters more than current disagreements between states? Or J, the Union will be preserved through military force if necessary? What was Lincoln expressing in this excerpt? Go ahead and take a couple minutes. Right? Look at that first line. We must not be enemies. We must not break our bonds of affection. Hopefully, the content of this excerpt has led you to the correct answer, which in this case is H, right? The Union matters more than the current disagreements between states. He says that this issue over slavery can be resolved through legal means and that we don't need a bloody war, right? The bloodiest war. All right, and now we've got questions 5, 6, 7, and 8. A little quiz for you to do on your own. I would like you to go ahead at this point, you pause the video, answer these questions. You can either send them to me on Canvas, shoot me an email, or throw them in the comments of this video. We've got 4 questions. Question 5, why did Lincoln's election in 1860 upset the South? Can you give me 2 reasons? Why was the South upset about Lincoln getting elected in 1860? Question 6, explain the creation of the Confederate States, right? How did that come about? What was the story there? And I want to know whether you think this divide, right, this separation could have been avoided. Question 7, what 3 points did Lincoln make in his first inaugural address? What was he trying to emphasize, right? Go back, watch the video, look at the slides. What 3 things did I tell you he was communicating to the country? And then question 8, what's the significance of the battle at Fort Sumter, right? That's a gimme. It was just on the multiple choice quiz. Why is Fort Sumter important, right? Why is it significant? Remember, in my class, significance usually means that it's either the first time something has happened, the last time something has happened, or it causes a major change. So you've got those questions. Make sure you answer them. Submit them to me somehow, some way. And it's been fun. It's been real. And next lesson, probably uploaded tomorrow, we're going to be looking at comparing the North and the South, looking at their resources, looking at their militaries, and how making some hypotheses as to how this is going to turn out based only on what we know about the North and the South going into the war. So I hope everybody's doing well. I hope this video was incredibly helpful to you. And if there's anything I can do to make these videos more helpful, definitely drop me a line in the comments or get in touch with me and we can definitely do that for you. But for now, right, take care, guys.